I just spent 2.5 years working on, we're going to have a great relationship with each other. And I'm set up future meetings with them, and it's going to obviously pan out really well for me. So this is something that it's a little bit of a grind. You talk to anyone who's in sales, they'll tell you that kind of the name of the game is the grind. It involves follow-up. It involves being diligent. It involves kind of keeping yourself in order there and kind of managing your pipeline. But yeah, it depends.
All right, welcome back to the Money Medicine Podcast. Today we are going to be discussing strategies to grow your healthcare business, tools to accelerate that growth, and how top practices and pharmacies are executing and winning. Well, as promised, we are back with another episode, and this time we have brought a guest. We have gone through a couple different hoops to make this happen, but we're super excited to have a guest that not only can touch on some of the subjects in regards to sales and growing your pharmacy, growing your business, but comes to the conversation with a lot of experience that can not just regurgitate some stuff that maybe Logan and I would say, but also add a ton to the conversation with experience and insights that we do not have on our end. So as always, I am joined with Logan Morse, right-hand man. And also for this episode, we're joined by Thomas Pennell. I'm saying that correctly, right? It's Pennell?
You are. Yeah, you got it.
All right, awesome. From Orthomolecular, I'm sure many of you guys know when I say that name, a very reputable, solid supplement company. And maybe you are someone listening and who works with Thomas, which would be cool too. But the purpose of today's episode is to talk a lot about sales and marketing, talk a lot about specifically doctor detailing, as that is a big area for a lot of pharmacies. It's a big focal point. And I think few people have the experience of Thomas. And so he can highlight and talk about his experience, his insights, doing significantly more reps than many pharmacies have. And so if you are either in the process or thinking about doing some more doctor detailing, this episode will for sure be valuable for you today. So again, Thomas, appreciate you hopping on the podcast and
happy to be here.
Bringing your wisdom.
I appreciate it.
We'll start off the bat, little background. He's been at Ortho for nearly 5 years now, covered different states, has a very successful territory, primarily runs the state of Iowa. I know from people at Ortho, people that have been at Ortho, et cetera, speak really highly of you, especially on the technical understanding of supplements. That was an insight that I've heard. So I guess walking back a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about your beginning, right? What made you want to get into sales? What made you want to start, working at Ortho and pursue this opportunity?
Yeah, so sales is always something I have wanted to do. This is kind of a career path that I've known for a while that I think that I would have been a good fit for. The skill set required to be proficient in this is obviously someone who is willing and able to talk to people, but that's not just the whole picture. It's someone who's competitive and also wants to be different, right? So my responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, I obviously don't sit at a desk every day. I get to go out and I get a lot of freedom. But with that freedom kind of comes some of that responsibility where I get to go out and I get to do different things every single day. And it's super rewarding, obviously full of different challenges, but super rewarding. And I talk to people who are in this field, talk to people who've been doing this for dozens of years, who are managers, who have been in this role for a long time. And it seemed like it'd be a really good fit. And it has been. So I really enjoy it.
Yeah. So as far as the kind of purpose of the episode in some ways is just to highlight all the different things that go into you having success. Because ultimately you are maybe selling something different at the end of the day or offering a different service than maybe a pharmacy might be. Someone who's, sending out and doing doctor detailing. But ultimately at the end of the day, you are fighting for the same attention, right? Mm-hmm. You are fighting for time with the providers. And so what I really wanted to highlight in this episode was all the things that go into you having success, because I think there's probably a gap between expectations and reality for a lot of these pharmacies of maybe how easily they think they should be able to, land more business or get time with these different providers. So first, let's walk back because, again, maybe some of these pharmacies, when they're starting out, they're probably not sending a proficient version of someone maybe who knows as much as you do, right? You're coming in with multiple years of experience. I think a lot of pharmacies, Logan, you could probably highlight this. I mean, come in, might hire someone, might send a staff member, send a pharmacist that doesn't have a ton of sales experience, maybe not as confident, maybe not as proficient, have all the sales skills. So walk me back a little bit to starting out, because I think a lot of people that are listening to this are either A, starting out, or sending someone is starting out. I mean, what was it like? Where do you feel like you lacked the most looking back, nearly 5 years now?
Yeah, so something I've told quite a few of my practitioners, especially pharmacists who have tried to venture into this kind of different modality of their practice, which is connecting with other providers, right? Is if it was easy, everybody would do this, right? If this was something that was incredibly easy and anyone could pick it up and anyone could walk out and do this tomorrow, everyone would do this, right? But the fact that it's not easy kind of shows how much value there really is in this. And so when I first started, this is a learning process that has taken years, right? So the way that I talk about this, it's what I do every day. You said I have a lot more reps than a lot of people, but this is what I do every single day, 5 days a week. And so for me, it comes really easily. But when I first started, it was very intimidating, right? And so I still remember the very first call, the very first meeting that I actually ever had with a practitioner was a nurse practitioner here in Des Moines, and I was terrified. I walked in and I was super nervous. I remember I talked super fast and I felt like I was just dumping a bunch of information and I forgot to skip a lot of the normal steps and processes I would now. But for anyone who's listening to this and saying, I don't know kind of where to start, just know that there is a learning curve, right? And that learning curve is super steep and it is kind of uncomfortable. This is not something that necessarily is for everybody. But like I said, if you want to be different, if you want your pharmacy or want your practice to be different, if you want the connections that you have to be different, these are skills that are really, really, really important to master. And it's kind of like riding a bike. Once you kind of learn how to do it, it gets a little bit easier. But if you don't do it for a while, then you get a little rusty for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. So, when you first started out, let's just use the nurse practitioner example. I'm sure palms are sweaty, talking super fast.
Yep.
But I'm sure maybe another thing that you did was probably talk a lot more than you maybe asked question, right?
Yep.
Which we can get into kind of like the tactical side of like what to say maybe, or how to say things, or how to run a meeting. But let's start with the big one. Like, how many times, especially early on, or even to this day, like how long does it take you to straight cold appointment? Let's say it's not a warm opportunity for you to get an opportunity to sit down with the provider and get sufficient time. Like, because I
Yeah.
think, again, Logan, chime in here, but it's, a lot of people maybe have the perception that they can make one phone call or one visit and they can get that time. So what does it look like for you? And then obviously Logan, echo kind of, um, you from the pharmacist side. I'm actually kind of
Yeah.
curious if there's like differences of like how quickly someone can kind of get a meeting with, different status or job titles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So for my end, I mean, there's different numbers you can look at. And I think that comes from us when we deliver that. We assume, like, I know my company is really good. And I know the information that I have is something a lot of people probably should want to hear, right? But you have to be able to understand that people's time is precious, right? And it's busy and they have to be selective on who they meet with, right? And so for me in particular, I mean, there's people I've walked into in their office and we've hit it off right off the bat, where I've showed them some information and said, hey, I've been looking for a collagen product, or oh, I've been looking for a probiotic. And we almost instantaneously are able to form a relationship and they become a customer, right? But I actually just had an example where there was an office in town that I've been trying to cold call on for 2.5 years since I've actually been in Des Moines. And I just had my first meeting with them a week ago. And that took me trying to cold call on them every single month and trying to get in front of decision makers every single month, right? And so is everyone going to give you the same amount of time right away? But that one, no. But that one that I just spent 2.5 years working on, we're going to have a great relationship with each other. And I'm set up future meetings with them and it's going to obviously pan out really well for me. So this is something that it's a little bit of a grind. You talk to anyone who's in sales, they'll tell you that kind of the name of the game is the grind. It involves follow-up. It involves being diligent. It involves kind of keeping yourself in order there and kind of managing your pipeline. But yeah, it depends. It's kind of the short answer.
I
Yeah.
really want to hit on something that you said that it took you 2.5 years just to get into that office. How
Yep.
do you really navigate too many touch points and not enough? Because a lot of times as a pharmacist, if I call an office and they're like, hey, no, we're too busy, we don't want to see you, I'm like, all right, I'll try again in like 3 months. But it sounds like you were month after month kind of knocking on the door. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, so you don't want to be inappropriate, right? Because people's time is valuable, right? Just like your time is valuable, Logan, my time is valuable, everyone's time is valuable here. So are the practitioners you're trying to talk to, and so are the people that you have to get through in order to talk to them. And so there definitely is a line. If you feel like you're doing it too much, you probably are, right? But the idea is that you constantly want to add value. And so every time I went into that office, I was bringing something new. I was trying to show them something or bring them some information, whether it be a new product, new service that we offer, or maybe I read a blog post that they had posted because they're very active on social media, or I followed them on Instagram and I saw that maybe, hey, they're adding a new service like IV therapies. And so I'd bring in some sort of information about a supplement that complemented their IV therapies and engage with them that way. It's more personalized and it caters more towards what their practice is trying to do. But again, it totally depends. There's people I walked in, it's just right time, right place, things work out. And there's times that you have to wait and you have to be patient, but you do have to be consistent and follow up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So on the follow-up side, because I think you hit on a couple of things. I just want to make sure they're reiterated.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes tons of effort. Sometimes it's a quick, kind of opportunity, and you hit it off right up from the beginning. But I'm sure by and large, it takes a couple of efforts. It takes that 6 to 8, kind of that you're talking about. There will be the ones and twos, but then there'll be the 10, 20, 30 follow-ups. How have you noticed, in terms of difference of maybe opportunity, that maybe the harder to get people have been in terms of like how big of customers they ended up being for you versus the ones that maybe they're easier to get into, right? Is there the harder they are to get to, the bigger the opportunity they are? Is that kind of play out on your end?
I would say for the most part, yes. I had a manager who always told me easy come, easy go, right? So people who are willing to kind of give things up very easily, that relationship's not always super stable. But the time that you can spend in the bigger relationship you can forge over a given period of time obviously will pay out. And so sometimes, absolutely, I would say more often than not, to answer your question, it is definitely worth it to be persistent and to keep up with that. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't do it. Like I said, this is not easy, but this is something that if it was easy, everyone would do it. But I think the reason everyone's even listening to this podcast in the first place is you want to be different. You want to differentiate the way that you currently practice to the way that you currently run your pharmacy. And this is one of those ways to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to kind of highlight, so, as you're working through these, and, it may be tricky, you may be able to answer this, but how do you find the best way to communicate with these practices? Is it walking in? Is it calling them? Is it setting up? I know I've been using RxVantage a lot more, especially with like dermatology offices, because it's the only way I can actually schedule meetings with them. Like every time I call, hey, can I meet with, so-and-so, or does, your practice manager have time? No, set it up on RxVantage. So are there, one, what do you find is the best? And then two, are there other systems like RxVantage that individuals should know about?
Yeah, so I would say kind of just my process. The first time I walk into an office, it's more of kind of an investigation is kind of the way that I view it, is that if I walk into an office and I want to meet with someone, not everyone is equal as it relates to how my company will work for them or how they will work for me, right? And so the first time I go in there, I'm usually asking a lot of questions like, hey, is the practitioner recommending supplements? Do you guys currently do XYZ? Or, hey, I read on your website that you guys offer this service. Tell me about that. Obviously, everyone's time is busy, so you don't want to stand up there just hounding a receptionist with 20 questions. But what I usually look for at the end of that first interaction is contact information, right? Get an email, get something that is directed towards some sort of decision maker within that office, because then you can utilize that, right? And so that becomes part of your follow-up, where if you walk in and I, talking to Logan, who's Chris's receptionist, I say, hey, Logan, is there a good way to get in contact with Chris? And you say, whatever it may be, I'll send an email here, his best time to reach him is this hour, whatever it may be. Utilize that, right? So if they give you any amount of information, you can utilize that to your advantage, where you can take that and then send a targeted email about, hey, I was on your website and I read this. I'd like to follow up with that. We actually do this as part of our pharmacy, as part of our company, whatever it may be, and utilize that. And then follow up on those emails. You can stop back in within a reasonable amount of time, right? We don't want to be annoying, but stop back in and say, hey, I sent Chris an email. Just want to follow up on that. Here's some additional information about it.
Yeah. So two things on that. First is, I'll kind of make a point. I don't know if you use this, Thomas, and kind of your, kind of investigative kind of meeting, but I've heard this before and I really love it. So I want to say it. When you ask for like the contact information, what's the best way to communicate with, said provider? And then they say like email, for example. One thing that I've heard salespeople talk about is kind of nonchalantly saying like, what would 1, 2, or maybe like 3 things that like would be really important to the provider that if I sent this email, he'd be more likely or she'd be more likely to open it or she'd be more likely to respond. I've heard that work pretty well. I've tested out kind of minimally, but maybe it'll be something for you. Maybe it'll be something for the listeners.
Yeah.
But the second thing that I wanted to get to is kind of frequency of follow up, because 6 to 8 is a range, but just like anything, we need like time wrapped around it, right? So what is kind of your cadence? Let's say you walk in, you do that investigative kind of meeting, collect some information, your intel, if you will. What does the follow-up process look like? Does it kind of depend on interest level? Like, how do you gauge and feel out, I need to be following up with them every day, or I need to be following up with them once a week? How do you kind of make that decision?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about interest level, because that's probably what my answer would be. And this is one of those instances where I'll kind of give a little tidbit that's probably leaning more into my experience on this, doing this for almost 5 years. If you have someone who is motivated, you have someone who's kind of a runner, and they're talking to you and they want to keep moving forward and they're interested and they fire back right away, that follow-up is going to be fast, right? That follow-up is going to be very soon and very consistent. And you might even be trying to get in front of them within a week or two, right? But if we try to get in contact with someone and they don't reply right away, or maybe there's not a huge interest, but you do know based on some information that you were given or based on a recommendation from another person in town or whatever it may be, that this is an of value relationship, that's one of those that might be like the 2.5 year experience that I just had, right? So it depends on interest level, and you kind of have to feel it out. Not everyone's the same. And if there was an exact cookie cutter approach to it, obviously I'd have that answer for you. But if someone's like, hey, we got to go, I'm super interested. This sounds great. I actually love the information that you brought me. That follow up is fast. It's like, okay, we need to get the information that they're looking for now. Whereas opposed to if someone's not really super receptive, but it's going to be a good fit, then you can give it a little time and kind of be a little more strategic with it.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. So kind of looking back on maybe early times for you,
Yeah.
and maybe more polished, seasoned version of yourself now.
Sure.
Where do you think you made the biggest mistakes, or where do you think either yourself and or new pharmacies make their biggest mistake? Because I know you have a couple of people that you talk to and kind of help out. So
I would say it's some of the stuff that we've already talked about, right? The frequency of the follow-up, or either not doing enough follow-up or doing too much follow-up, right? Understanding kind of what people want to know, because you want to be really, and we've kind of hit on it a little bit, but we should probably talk about more, is asking questions, right? So the skill of asking questions and understanding why we're asking questions and what questions we're looking to ask. Those two things, kind of the frequency, understanding that not everyone, you don't have to devote the same amount of time to everyone, right? Is that some people, really, really, really do need and want your time, and some people don't, right? There's givers and takers for sure. And then beyond that, it's a lot of the stuff we talked about before. And so early on, and this is, something to tell a lot of people who are listening to this, if you're new to this, if this is something you want to try, you won't be perfect at it, right? If you are, awesome, right? You obviously have a great skill set and a gift that was given to you that you obviously really should lean into. But because obviously some of this comes more natural than others. But if you want to force yourself to do this and really put yourself out there, this is going to be one of those things that only time and experience can replace, right? So early on, there's a lot of things like I said, I talk about very naturally that I did not really understand when I first started.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure. So I think maybe something that's probably pretty important is, and we've touched on it a little bit, but it's like expectation setting. So I want to go a little bit back into like mindset a little bit. When you first started your first year outside sales, how big of a gap was there from your expectation of how fast you would grow and how big of a territory you'd have versus what reality is? Because I think that always plays an influence in terms of like disappointment, right? If you expected not to sell to anyone, you wouldn't be disappointed if you only had one sale for 3 months. But if your expectation was 10, you're, 10% of the way there, you're crushed, right? So how did you kind of balance that, or what were your expectations? And then what did that kind of look like early on?
Yeah, so obviously a really important side of this that is before you would even start, I say, is just as important as actually doing is setting goals, right? Is having metrics that you can look at and talk about, hey, where did we start and where are we going, right? And maybe it doesn't necessarily, because when I say goals to some of my pharmacists, a lot of what we think about are dollar signs, right? It doesn't have to be dollar signs. It can be touch points, right? It can be my goal for this week is to call 10 providers in my area, right? Or my goal for this month is to sit down with 5 providers in my area who I've never met with, right? And so we can measure
more activity based, right? To where it's more just like, am I doing the work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about lead and lag metrics a lot. So the lag metric would be what is going to happen as a result of the action that we take today. And so the lead metric, the thing that we can control in this instance would be activity, right? How many touch points are we having? How many outbound calls are we making? How many times are we walking into a new pharmacy or walking into a new doctor's office, right? Those are things we control today. And what is the lag metric behind that? It is dollars, right? It is things that will follow and help our business and help get referrals and help do all that good stuff, right? And so goals are super, super, super important. That's where I would kind of start, is sit down and say, okay, what do I want to get out of this? And then work our way back. What is a lead metric that we can control?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So as far as lunch and learns, because I think Logan maybe chime in here, those are pretty popular in the pharmacy space. In a super previous episode, I think Logan shared his thoughts on lunch and learns, or one that he did more recently. But do you do them, the good, the bad, the ugly? They're popular. I guess maybe pharmacies doing them. Do you think they're a good idea? What are your overall thoughts? And Logan, feel free to add any context here, so maybe he knows the story.
I would love to hear it from Logan's perspective for sure. But from my perspective, this is actually something I worked on with. There's a pharmacist I work on with in Iowa who's actually started to do some of this and actually do lunch and learns with doctors' offices to talk about their pharmacy services, specifically their compounding side, right? And so the lunch and learn opportunity is a great opportunity if it goes really well, but this also comes back to managing expectations. Is there are lunch and learns that don't go very well, and there are lunch and learns that do go really well, right? Where we sit down with everyone for an hour and a half and everyone's super engaged and asking a lot of questions, and it's a lot of fun. And I bring a lot of sell sheets, and I've got information that people can read and go over, and we're all sharing a good meal and everyone's in a good mood. And then there's lunch and learns where maybe you don't even see the healthcare provider, you don't see the doctor, don't see the pharmacist because something came up or whatever it may be, or they ran over with a patient or whatever. Those things happen, right? And obviously the risk that comes along with that is the first word there, lunch. There is a cost associated with that, right? And so if we are going to spend some money, obviously we want to get some sort of outcome out of that, right? And so they are sometimes high risk, high reward, where you are spending quite a bit of money trying to feed an entire staff, but it is definitely beneficial, where you get a great opportunity to educate all the staff at once, work with the decision makers to really move business forward. And then there's some opportunities where maybe that's just not the case. I would love to hear what Logan feels about lunch and learns.
I honestly detest lunch and learns, just because so many times I go in, I have a presentation, handouts, everything put together. The staff comes in, they sit down, and you can just tell they're not super interested. They're just there for a free meal. And so I am going into an office next month. But instead of doing the whole office, I just said, hey, I'm only looking to speak with this provider and their team. And, I'll come back another day to speak with another team. So instead of having 45 or 50 people at the meeting, I'm going to have 6. And so I'm hoping that it builds a little bit more personal connection. But I feel like so many times, I'll call an office and I'm like, hey, I'd love to come in and just maybe sit down with a provider, or provider XYZ. And they're like, well, are you going to bring lunch? And I was like, no, I'm not going to, because last time I came in, there wasn't a whole lot of interest, and people didn't listen to the presentation, so it's just not something I'm comfortable with. I'd be more than happy to bring in some drinks, some coffee, but I'm not going to bring in lunch. And sometimes I feel like providers abuse that with reps, or even just like, hey, yeah, bring us lunch, and then they don't care. Like, they just want the lunch, they don't really care. And then you leave, and no one cares that that was from you. They're just like, oh, we got free lunch. It's not like, oh, that was Keystone Compounding Pharmacy, thank you so much for the lunch. It was just like, we just got lunch. So that's why I don't love them. But
so maybe there's an opportunity here of learning. I really want to just kind of sort through it. I'm curious, and this is not like accusatory by any means, but I'm genuinely curious. Logan, did you offer the lunch and learn as your first introduction? Because I was going to go in some way, what follow up number maybe does a lunch and learn work better, right? Leading with the lunch and learn, how does that perform versus hey, this is our third, fourth time I've tried following up, then I gave the lunch and learn. Is there more interest that way? Between the two of you, I guess what Thomas, for you, because you're more of a fan, Logan's not. When do you use the lunch and learn that you've seen work well to where you have a more positive feeling towards it?
Yeah, so I can speak on that. There's obviously two different types of lunch and learns, in my opinion. There are some offices, and this is totally okay, right? Where it's the expectation that lunch is provided if we're going to take the, and I think that's fair, right? That if people are going to take their time out of their day to sit down and listen to what you have to say, that we share a meal and I provide some food, as a thank you, right? And I think that's totally okay. And there's a lot of offices where that is the expectation that if you do want to come in and you want to be in there, that food is required. And so there's kind of a couple tips that I have that I've worked with a few different pharmacists on, a few different other providers with. And one of the big ones, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to start doing three, four, I don't know what you spent, Logan, but $300, $400, $500 lunches with some offices, is take people out of their office. Right. So get them out of the office. And if you're trying to meet with them in their office, there's oftentimes an expectation that we do have to feed the entire staff again, which is okay. I like doing that. But if you can get a very, very, very busy provider outside of their office and sit them down for coffee in the morning. For a lot of providers, that's very early in the morning, so be ready for that. But if you can sit them down outside of their office for coffee in the morning or grab dinner or whatever it may be, outside of that, dinner is a fantastic way to get someone's one-on-one attention because there's nothing else going on, right? There's no patients, there's no practice, there's no office managers going on. There's nothing. It's just you and the decision maker sitting down. And sometimes that takes a further level of relationship before we can get to the point where we can ask someone to go grab dinner with us, right? It's usually not our first move. But if we can do some of the coffee or do some of the other stuff first, then we can kind of work our way around having to do the entire lunch. And the other tip I had is if you do get in a scenario where you are bringing in lunch for everyone and it feels like maybe people aren't paying attention or you're just kind of just dumping information and people are just kind of absorbing it or not absorbing it, right? Is start asking questions again, right? Because you really want to uncover, because you're talking to a multitude of different people who will potentially all have different roles within inside that office, right? But we kind of want to win over everybody. We want everyone to at least somewhat like us in those offices, right? So just ask questions. Ask questions, have you ever, or what's your experience with pharmacies? What pharmacies have you guys been to? Or for me, it's stuff like, hey, who takes supplements, right? What supplements do you take? Where do you get them from? And usually what you'll find, especially since I've been doing this for a while, is that people oftentimes will give you something when you start asking a lot of questions that you can kind of take the conversation off with. Like, oh yeah, I take this product from this company. Oh, that's interesting. Well, have you seen this? And then it just kind of snowballs from there. And next thing you know, you have quite a few people engaged with you. And so when it comes time to talk to a decision maker, people are usually in a better mood. And it differentiates you for sure. Because not everyone does that, trust me.
Yeah, there's some nuggets in there for sure. All right, so on the aspect of being successful or having more success when it comes to doctor detailing, I don't think you're probably one or the other at this point. You're probably a combination of a lot of effort, a lot of consistency, a lot of work ethic, right? But then also match that with a lot of expertise. But maybe when you're starting out, it was very little expertise in maybe the subjects that you were talking to these providers about, combined with maybe a lot less follow-up and a lot less work ethic than you have today. So, do you think it's obviously a combination of the two to be ultra successful, but what do you think is maybe most important early on? And where do you feel like the switch flipped for you to maybe when you started to have a little bit more success in your territory? Do you feel like, man, I just got way more proficient at talking about products and talking about what we had to offer? Or do you think it was, man, I just really doubled down on my efforts and I was just way more consistent in my follow-up efforts? Like what kind of was it for you? And then how do you see it now?
Yeah, so each rep in our company is different, right? If we were to talk to different reps, Logan, I believe you work with an ortho rep. I'm sure that their style is different than mine, right? Is that if you were to sit down with different reps, the split between product knowledge, which is what we call that, the actual ability to retain and deliver high level technical information versus what does our actual sales acumen look like? How much follow up do we do? What kind of questions are we asking? How efficiently do we ask for business is very different, right? And for me, I lean pretty heavily on my product knowledge. That's kind of something I'm quote unquote known for, which has helped me quite a bit because, in my opinion, if you're going to speak to obviously well-educated providers who do this your day-to-day is speaking to patients and understanding complex physiological and biological challenges that people are having, right? So I want to match that and I want to be able to deliver that information where I am always constantly adding value. That is super, super, super important, right? Because if Logan is to sit down with a rep from a company and they're not delivering any value, whatsoever, and that's probably happened a couple of times. He's nodding. Yep. If they're not delivering any value, and I hear this from people that I work with, where they talk to other reps from other companies, where like, yeah, that guy came in or girl came in, and he just like I got nothing out of that conversation. Well, how likely are you to talk to that person, right? It's kind of like dating, right? If it's interesting and it's fun, you want to keep seeing that person. If it's not, and it's just dry and boring, and there's no value in that, then you don't want to keep seeing that person. Right. And so for me, my split's a little bit different. But if I was to recommend kind of what should your split look like to someone else who's just kind of getting started at this, at first, if you're not an expert in that area, it should lean more into that follow up and being diligent and being proactive in your process, because everyone's time is super, super, super valuable. My time is valuable. Logan's time is valuable. Chris's time is valuable. The practitioners you guys are trying to talk to's time is valuable, because you have to realize the time that you're asking them for is time away from their practice and their patients, right? If you're talking to a pharmacist, it's time away from everything that you get. I know what you guys do. You guys are doing a lot. It's time away from everything, right? And so you have to be very respectful of that and make sure they're delivering on the product knowledge, be an expert in what you're trying to deliver, but also respecting their time is doing what you say you're going to do and following up. Absolutely. It's both. Absolutely both.
Gotcha. So I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think on the sales side, it's so important, which is how you follow up. And I think you've hit on it in so many different ways, but in terms of what follow up looks like for you, it sounds like it's a lot of value-based follow-up. Like, one, the personalization, seeing recent posts, new services, etc. But you're always, correct me if I'm wrong, trying to follow up with value. It's never a, hey, just circling back on last week's phone call. It's never any of that where it's like just nagging or pesking. It seems like every time you're trying to bring a new angle, a new avenue to connect with the provider, connect with the pharmacist, connect and build a relationship that kind of stems from, I'm gonna provide value. Correct?
Yeah, so I'd tweak that a little bit. I think it is a little bit of that, but you don't want it to sound like that. Right? Because you do want people to know that you're present and you are trying to be like, hey, I just emailed you last week again. Hello, hi, right? But you don't want people to feel like that's the information that you're giving. And so I use value, especially technical product knowledge, to kind of supplement that. I guess pun intended, because I sell supplements. But so it's one of those, it just kind of depends. And this is one of those I kind of lean on because I've been doing this for a while type of thing. But there definitely are instances where I'm like, hey, just following up. I know I sent you this email. I want to make sure you saw it again. There is some of that. Absolutely. And that is absolutely important. If you're just getting started too, a really good tip that I did when I was brand new was just pre-create some emails that can be customized. And so if you have like hey, I've got a follow-up for you, you can write one that's more or less like, hey, I just walked in your office today. Right. So here's the today email, like, hey, my name's Chris. I work with Growth Farm, XYZ, and here's the content of that email. And then leave some customizable spaces in there and make sure that you actually fill in with the customization. Because I know I've sent off a couple where I didn't. Oops.
Forgot. It's like insert business name.
Yep. Insert hello, Dr. X. Yeah, I've done that a couple times. But when you first start, it does help and it saves some time. But you can send one the day of. Right. And then this is part of managing what we call your pipeline. And so making sure that people that you've met with that you want to qualify is what we call. So basically making sure that there's at least some sort of value between that relationship, that when you move them down that process, you can pre-create some other emails or some other follow-up tools as well. Maybe utilize different, little treats that you bring in, or you have a sheet, like a one sheet, quick bullet points, something super easy to read that highlights, hey, here's my pharmacy, and here are the points that I want to emphasize. Here's the services that we offer. Here's what your patients get that's different here than if you go to CVS, Walmart, Walgreens, whatever it may be. So you can kind of pre-create some of that. So it's not a huge task where if you're trying to talk to 50 people at once, you're not reinventing the wheel every single time, where you're more or less able to just plug and play some of these resources.
Yeah, for sure. As far as now, because I think early on, it's obviously easier to make a lot of mistakes, but I think now you're a lot more polished. And so someone might be listening to this episode and say, man, Thomas never makes a mistake, or Thomas never walks into an office and doesn't get a deal.
Man,
right?
I wish. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't we all? But, what does, for someone listening to maybe feel a little bit better about maybe their early days or kind of getting started, like, what was the worst visit you've had in the last 6-12 months where you're like, man, I'm not going to use first names because I don't want, them to know exactly, or, whatever. But like, You still screw up too. We all still screw up, right?
Oh yeah.
Meetings don't
Yep.
go how we want. Like,
Yep.
so what's one recently where maybe you got tossed out, you got thrown out, you got an F bomb?
That happens. I'll tell you guys right now, I've been doing this for years, and that's kind of where people say sales reps have thick skin. And there's some funny, I guess, sales meme pages I follow that are about, I was in sales for 2 years, and look at me, it's like a young guy versus an old guy now. Like, you get used to it. At this point, it's kind of fun. I don't know. I know that sounds really weird to say, but once you get used to it and you don't take it personal, because it is not personal at all. People saying no, that's just the way that people are. They don't want to just, like, if everyone who walked up to you and asked you to do business with you just said yes to automatically, right? I would start to question that, but that's the way that people are, right? And so as it relates to a bad call that I have, I mean, I've had those, that we kind of hit on before. There's one I can think of, and I'm not going to use names, but I spent, I think it was $300 or $400 on a lunch that I fed the entire staff, and the doctor came in for maybe a minute and a half, and I asked them one question. I said, "How did you get into functional medicine?" Because they have a background in functional medicine, and they looked at me and said, "I don't answer questions. That's not something I do. I'm not trying to be rude. I just don't do that." And then they just walked right out. So it happens. I mean, that stuff happens, and you just kind of have to roll with it. And what you do from there is kind of up to you. If you think that there's still value in it, you can follow up. I would recommend not bringing another $400 lunch the next month. But there's some other avenues.
You just brought the wrong meal.
Yeah, they picked it. But you can, there's some other avenues that you can definitely utilize, still to try to engage and add value. The biggest thing is adding value, because if you're not, Logan can tell you about this. If you're not adding value, you're not doing anything. You're not getting anywhere.
Yeah. Logan, you kick anyone out yet? You do anything you tell anyone, I don't want to answer questions yet?
Well, not yet. Normally, I listen to him for like 5 minutes. I go, "Oh, look, I've got a patient who's calling me." Sorry.
That's very nice of you.
I know he's, trying to be respectable. Um, one of the things that I know we haven't kind of mentioned, and I'm quite curious, when you're selecting businesses to go through, do you tend to group them? Say, okay, this month I'm focusing mainly on pharmacies, or like this month I'm focusing on doctor's offices. So, on like the pharmacy side, I'm trying something new to where I was going out to lots of different types of practitioners, and now I'm trying to just focus in on one subset, so that way I can bring the like repeatable information. Are there strategies along that side?
I would say it's not. I don't necessarily go month by month. I do notice myself kind of involuntarily following some trends, I guess, right? When semaglutide Ozempic kind of first got on the big wave there, I was definitely targeting some more IV clinics, med spas that were offering those services. Kind of midway through this year, I guess we're not nearly there anymore. It's October, middle of October somehow. But midway through this year, when people are starting to get a little buzz about indirect versus direct reimbursement for prescription medications flipping over in January, that kind of changed the tone and messaging I had with some pharmacies I was already talking to. And so there's some specific information I followed with that. I would say it follows keep a pulse on kind of what people are interested in, right? So obviously when we talk about supplements, that changes from season to season, because now I tell my accounts I'm going to sound like a broken record. But this time of year, we start talking about immune supplements, and it's time to start doing some marketing and some focus on that. So I would say, again, I hate this answer, but it's kind of the truth, is it depends, right? So I do follow kind of seasonal trends. I do follow kind of what's very popular within this space, while simultaneously I try to keep my options open. When I'm looking online, I look for people that I know, based on my experience, are probably going to align pretty well with my company, which is typically integrative functional medicine practices, pharmacies who are independent and trying to do things a little bit differently. Those are typically who we work with best. So I typically seek those out.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Oh, it's brutal. It was, from a pharmacist standpoint, you're kind of going out there and you're just never consistent. So you go to, a pain specialty office, and then all of a sudden you go to dermatology, and you're like,
Yep.
those are two different like conversations. And then you try to remember, okay, I know I talked to them about pain, but did I accidentally mix up my information? Yeah, it's a learning experience for sure, because as pharmacists we don't go through marketing. There's some individuals now who are doing MBAs and things of that nature, but we don't learn marketing, sales, business development. We go to school to learn about drugs, right?
Yeah.
And so Yeah, it's definitely a big learning curve.
I tell that to people all the time. Like, none of us went to school to sell supplements. My degree's in biology, right? There's, it's something that we all learn kind of going forward. But yeah, it does get a little confusing, and kind of circling back, some of those tips I gave earlier, where you can kind of pre-create some emails. You can have one that's for pain clinics, have one that's for a dermatology office, have one that's for whatever. Talk about the key services that you know that your practice or your business or whatever it may be are going to align typically pretty well. And that takes some thought, and it also takes a little bit of experience. So I know that's one of those things that probably makes sound super easy, but that's just because I do it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just a lot of, I think a story that I always use with clients is like um, the frequency or consistency matters in a lot of things. Like
Yeah.
if you use the example in the story that I tell is always if you're baking a cake, you can put it in the oven for 400 degrees, but if you don't put it consistently in there for 400 degrees
Yeah.
and you take it in, take it out for 2 minutes, and sometimes it's in the freezer and then sometimes it's back in the oven, like you don't end up with an edible cake. And I think kind of similarly, sales is like that, where if you're not consistent enough with it, like you could be doing a lot of the right things, you're just not doing them frequently. If you go to the gym and you're doing the workout plan that's followed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you do it once of a year, right? It's the whole analogy of like consistency over intensity. And so where I kind of want to go with that is you mentioned pipeline, and that's, obviously a word in sales that everyone's familiar with, but maybe a
Yep.
pharmacy isn't kind of pick up on it. It's kind of managing your deal flow, your opportunities in a form of a pipeline. They have different stages, but ultimately where I'm going with this is if you got dropped into a new state tomorrow, and let's just say, Thomas, you get plopped into, Washington, right?
Love it.
Realistically, let's say you have no contacts, no relationships, you're starting
Yeah.
brand new. When you take a look at starting, what's a realistic time frame for you where like you'd reflect back and be like, all right, how am I doing? Versus like initially it's just like attack, put in the effort, establish relationship, etc. Like what's a realistic time frame for you where it's like if I start a relationship to like close business, it's typically in this time frame, because I think maybe
Yeah.
people give up a little early, and this will help shed some light on that.
I love that question. And there's this book that's really good, and I totally forget the name, and it would look really cool if I knew it. But it talks about how we reap the benefit in sales and business. We reap the benefits of our efforts 90 days prior. So whatever we were doing 90 days ago, whatever we were doing 3 months ago, that's what we see the benefits of today. Right. And so when we think about that, we actually just talked about that within my own team. We had a call about this a few days ago. We talked about how 2024 does not start January 1st. 2024 actually started 2 weeks ago. It started October 1st, because you zoom yourself back, or zoom yourself forward, I guess, 90 days. When are we going to see the benefits of our 90-day effort? It's starting right now, right? And so if I was to go into a new place, I know we just kind of talked about pipeline, but what Chris is referring to with the pipeline, I know it's a super easy sales term. So if you guys are in sales, you know this, but some of you may not. It's that we have picture a pipeline between like a big lake, a big ocean, and then the end product that we're looking for, right? There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of businesses, a lot of doctors, a lot of doctors' offices, a lot of pharmacies, right? A lot of different people, but only a certain portion of those are actually ever going to become a customer. Right. And so the way that we utilize our pipeline is to try to put as much in the top. It's kind of like a funnel, put as much in the top as we can. So as we naturally work through this sales process, the end result are going to be well-qualified customers who will continue to do business with us. Right. And so it's important to constantly feed your pipeline, but then also manage people through it. So it's always, always, always super important to add new people to the beginning. We call that prospecting. So make sure that we're getting new names, getting new contacts, getting new touch points out, asking for referrals, putting people kind of at the top of that pipeline, and then working them down by the follow-up. That is the follow-up that we're talking about. And then the end product is business.
And I think the nugget in there that probably gets glossed over is you said you got to be adding people to the top,
Yep.
and you got to be simultaneously managing the people and working through and actually closing the business, right? It's not all right, I'm going to throw everyone into the top of the funnel. I'm going to do all these initial outreach efforts, and then I'm just going to work my pipeline, because by the end, you'll get to the bottom, you will have worked your pipeline, and it's like, man, I have no one tomorrow. I have no one next week. I have no one next month. And so what you're saying, and I don't think people want to hear, but it is the right answer, is it never stops. There's not I'm just going to, I did my efforts. I did my outreach. Like I'm just working this pipeline, and there's no new for me, right?
Eventually, if you get pretty good at this, there will be a point where people start referring you to other people, and people will hear about you, and there becomes kind of what we call the invisible hand, where stuff just kind of happens because of your efforts, but it doesn't happen out of nowhere. It doesn't happen if you're just sitting in your office doing nothing. It doesn't happen if you're not talking to people. It doesn't happen if you're not meeting to people or meeting with people. Excuse me. It happens if you're adding value and doing all the things that we talked about before. But it's super, super, super important. Like if you were to go drop me off in Washington today, the first thing that I would do is spend all night, all day tomorrow, all weekend putting names, like hundreds of names of different offices that I can talk to, and then making that first touch point, going into them, asking those questions, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, doing some of that investigation. Who is even qualified? Who even talks about what is good with my business? Who is even a good prospect, right? And then moving those people into a new category. And a part of this is staying organized, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do that. Maybe we can touch on that too. But is taking those hundreds of names that you have, that's just an arbitrary number, taking those hundreds of names that you have and maybe saying the rule we use about 10-3-1, right? So if you got 10 names, about 3 of those people will probably take a meeting with you, and probably 1 of those has actually become a customer. So if you zoom that back out and say we got 100 names, right? Hopefully my math checks out here, but if you got 100 names, 30 of those people
Careful.
are actually good. Yeah, right.
Take out the
got a lot
calculator.
of pharmacists listening, right? But you got 100 people, and they got 30 of them maybe will take a meeting with you, right? If you've done your due diligence and actually followed that pipeline process, even then 10 maybe are going to be good customers. You still have to talk to all 100, right? There's still an initial follow up with all 100. And so I know
you can't just look at the list and siphon out the 70. Be like, oh, here's my 30. You can't just look at them and do that.
Are you going to lend me your crystal ball, Chris? That I know you're using over there. Yeah. Yeah, it's you kind of hit the nail on the head where you said, this is something you're constantly doing, and people probably give up really, really, really quickly, right? But for some people, I mean, the success of your business will depend on this skill. This is a skill that you have to master and you have to continuously do. Once you kind of get on this, there's no really getting off, and it's something that everyone ultimately should be doing, to begin with. But yeah, you have to be persistent. 90 days started 2 weeks ago for 2024. So if you want to be different next year, it's time to start doing it now.
Yeah, that's huge. That's so well said. I'm going to carry that intel forward. So because, again, I think a lot of the audience is going to be starting out new, might hear that exact message of 2024 has already started and get a little nervous.
Sorry.
It's
the way it is. Yeah.
Say what needs to be said. We don't sugarcoat stuff.
Yeah.
But would you recommend they start with some of those kind of smaller targets to where they can get some reps in before they go after those big ones? Did you burn a couple bridges going after some big opportunities early on when you just weren't prepared? Or how do you kind of see that in terms of analyzing opportunity?
There's probably a few that I wish I probably could have gotten back if I had kind of the more seasoned experience that I do now. And I haven't even been doing this as long as a lot of other people at my company, right? Or a lot of other people in sales, but I'll probably say the same thing 5 years from now. Saying,
if you're growing, you should. Yeah.
2023, I wish I had a few of those back. I would have done something a little bit differently, but it goes to show you, this is one of those things that you just get better at over time. So are there times I wish I would have done something differently? Yes. Would I wait? No. I would, because the time to wait was, 2 weeks ago, like we just said. I wouldn't wait to go after kind of those bigger opportunities or even, really take time to practice, because the time to practice is the time that you're doing it. And you will get better at it. You're not going to be perfect at it. And it's something that you're constantly sharpening and refining, right? So looking back, would I have changed anything? Would I have waited? No, because some of those have still turned out to be good opportunities for me. I just would have done things probably a little bit differently.
Yeah, and you just learn the lesson by failing kind of in that process.
This is trial by fire, guys. I hate to burst your bubbles.
There's no aspect to sales, or there's no reasonable opportunity in sales. Like maybe if you're selling, I don't know, air, it might be a little bit easier.
Wheels.
But
we'll jump right in. Yeah.
There's no great sales opportunity that doesn't come with a lot of battle wounds. Like that's just comes with the territory. But one thing I was going to say is, maybe you've heard this before, but I really like it. On the whole 2024 thing, is Ed Milet talks about separation season. That's one of his things. And he always talks about this time period of the year being separation season, because a lot of people are already looking at the holidays. They have travel plans. Obviously fall, you got school, you got a lot of just personal activities and stuff. And so a lot of people take the foot off the gas pedal. And so it's a great time to, get ahead. And further maybe distance yourself from your competition, or catch up to other competition that might be coasting into the end of the year. So with that, how do you kind of deal with we'll circle back with this January 1. We'll circle back with you in 2024. How do you kind of handle that objection? Because that's going to be a really timely one going into the rest of the year.
That happens every year, right? And when someone says something like that, you don't want to argue with them, right? Because family time is important. I'm not going to sit here and say that I work all day every day, right? Because we have to take time for yourself, right? It would go crazy. So people do, they have family members, they have lives, they have personal stuff going on. Something that is super, super, super important is when you're doing this entire process, and we could talk about this probably for hours, right? But is getting people to commit to things, right? That's super important. We always talk about in our industry, we talk about at our company, before we even go in to talk to someone, is we form what's called a commitment objective, where what is the one thing, if I was to get anything out of this, what's the one thing I want to try to get someone to commit to by the end of this? So we're not walking in blind. We're not walking in just saying, hi, my name's, Logan, and I have a pharmacy and I'm here, right? And that's it. And you just walk out and it's like, cool, I talked to him, right? No, what's the commitment? Well, when I walk into this office, I want to get Chris to commit to sitting down with me in 2 weeks. But it can even be smaller, right? That first meeting, my commitment objective is get them to commit to giving me an email or giving me contact information, right? That's a commitment, right? But it comes back to this time of year where people are kind of having that seasonal thing where they're like, no, I don't even want to talk about Thanksgiving or Christmas, reach out to me at the end of Q1 2024, right? It's just say it's okay and just have them recommit to something. We don't want to object those. We want to let those be okay. And then also make them recommit to something. So you don't want to necessarily take up their Christmas vacation, but make them commit to, okay, well, let's get something now for January. Oh, can I follow up with you in 3 weeks? That's a commitment. Can I follow up with you in 3 weeks? And then sit down with you and we can maybe look at what things are looking like for Q1, or can I give you a phone call, 2 weeks before Christmas, and we can take a look at what your January schedule looks like. But just any level of commitment, sitting down and doing something further is a win. That is a win. The wins aren't always just people saying, yeah, let's do stuff.
Yeah. It's continuing the at least the conversation forward. Something you said that, if you've said so many good things, this is awesome.
Thank you.
But I picked up on the entire time, which is you've referenced a number of times the training of your company, right? Mm-hmm. And so whether it's your company or another company, I would assume many in a sales organization are getting sales training, right? They have their bosses, see shedding light, helping them with objections, helping them with, kind of intros and all facets of maybe, their pipeline. But for a pharmacy, they more than likely are a one-man band, a one-woman band, right? They don't have that sales kind of training organization. So for you, you do have that. And for those that don't, whether it's a book, a podcast, things that you plugged into, how have you stayed sharp, right? Because it's not, I want to hit the ground running tomorrow and just go crazy. It's also kind of the analogy of if I had to chop, I'm butchering the phrase here, but if I had to chop a tree down, I'd spend the first, X amount of hours sharpening my blade, right? Yeah. So what has helped you outside of your sales organization to kind of sharpen your skills that have helped you be more effective in this job, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, the thing that I can't just give to people is the training that I got through my company, because I did some training. I did a 2-year training program in ortho. We pride ourselves, and obviously, Logan, you work with an ortho rep. If you were to ask us what's our big differentiator, other than obviously our super high quality products, is the training on our sales staff and the education that we have. We are a well-educated, sharp, dressed, polished, follow-up, everything Salesforce. That's what we do, and that's kind of what we're known for. So I kind of have that in my back pocket. But what I do outside of that is surround myself with people who also do this. So my coworkers, I'm constantly talking to them every single day. And obviously maybe a lot of you don't have a full phone book full of sales reps, but what you can do is listen to some sales.
At least follow the meme pages, right?
Yeah, right. Awesome meme pages, yeah. But you can jump on some sales podcasts. I don't have personally a great one that I recommend, but I know there's tons of them out there. And obviously a lot of information is different, right? Brian Burns is someone who I follow on LinkedIn. He's great. There's some great books. Sell with a Story by Paul Smith is kind of where I got started. That was the first book that was recommended to me by a previous manager. There are hundreds of sales books. where people are recommending different tricks, different tactics, different kind of processes, different things that they follow. Like everything I've said is not the one golden way to do it. It's just the way that I've kind of found works for me. And every sales rep is different, right? Logan's probably worked with a bunch of them. He knows that everyone is different and we do things differently. So there will be, if you're listening to this, you want to try some of it, there will be stuff that will work for you, and that comes with time. But if you want to sharpen those skills, there are plenty of resources. There's books, there's podcasts, there's blogs, there's all sorts of stuff. And something we do that may sound kind of silly to some people, but is definitely high value is role playing these conversations. And so practice these with other people, and what does that look like? And just get practice. So the first time you do it is not the first time you need to do it. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Because you don't know, to your point. I mean, you could walk in your first opportunity. I mean, unlikely, but possible. Your first opportunity could be with a whale, right? An amazing opportunity that could be massive opportunity. And you're going to wish that you put some training in advance and that you weren't fumbling your way through the conversation. So on the role play, because I'm genuinely curious, how often are you guys role playing and for how long?
Yeah, so when we first started, that's something we definitely do. We do that in training, and we're very lucky. For every rep gets the first 6 weeks classroom style learning, 8 to 5, reading through books and getting providers who work in our office to actually come and teach us, and also from sales managers who teach us these skills. We role play with each other. And so we do kind of pretend like one of us is a gatekeeper, or decision maker, or pharmacist, and we practice detailing those products and giving feedback and things like that. So if you're someone who's listening to this and not really sure where to go from there, you can probably use someone who if you feel comfortable doing that or whatever it may be. But practice those conversations. What would you say if you were to sit down right now and I was a doctor and I was sit down in front of you, or I was a pharmacist, sit down in front of you? What would you say to me? Let's say you had 2 minutes of my time. What would you say to me? What questions would you ask to get that business moving forward? What would you say that would take me from step A to step B, and then hopefully open the door for further conversations? What does that look like? And it looks different for everyone. So,
yeah, I can say firsthand, I was in a sales group that had morning calls for like 90 days, and it had role play as I think it was like 3 days a week was role play. And I mean, if you met the people and you talked to them, you would automatically assume they'd just be killers the second they started talking about their business, but because they were just so confident, they're easy to talk to. But what's fascinating is hearing them pitch, or hearing them go through that, whether it's the elevator pitch or they're kind of in the middle of the conversation or going into the close. And some seemingly very confident people really fumbled and really struggled through a lot of those conversations. And so I think if you're not good, welcome to the club. So many people are not, but also
everyone.
It takes a lot of reps to work through a lot of those objections, because there can be so many, right? So practicing we've got a number of different resources that for our clients, because I mean, they can be endless. Again, they kind of boil down to typically a couple core categories, but you don't know what you're going to be hit with, but you don't want to have your jaw hit the floor and have nothing. Right. And so it's better to train and prep yourself for maybe the worst case scenario or all possible scenarios than to miss out on an amazing opportunity just because you didn't put in a little preparation.
Yeah. And so some of those key things that we prep definitely ahead of time are come up with some questions. You don't have to come up with the questions on the spot. It's not something you need to create, off the seat of your pants. That would be really, really hard. That's very challenging for a lot of very seasoned reps, even at my company. That's a very hard thing to do, is figuring out good questions to ask. So come up with questions ahead of time. What do you want to know? And then work your way backwards. Use open-ended questions. Don't use closed-ended questions, because if I were to ask
yes or no's.
Yeah. If I want information from Chris and I say, is this a podcast? And he goes, yeah. Okay, cool. I didn't learn anything.
Next question.
Yeah. Right. But use open-ended questions. So open-ended questions are what, how, why, where, when, things like that. Right. And so just ask them, get them talking, right? Those are really good things to start with, and then know kind of where you want to go, and always, always, always finish with asking for something. Ask for a commitment, ask for business, ask for something. Because if you don't ask, and there's numbers, you see them in different places, 60 to 70% of sales reps don't ask for business, which is crazy to me, because that's kind of what we're paid to do. But if you don't ask for business, you didn't really accomplish anything, right? My mom always told me, and she might listen to this later, but my mom always told me the answer is always no until you ask, right? You don't know what they're going to say until you ask, right? You have to ask. And so if you want something from someone, ask for it, right? If I wanted Logan to meet with me, ask for it. If I wanted Logan to buy 12 bottles of dehist or whatever it may be from my company, ask for it, right? So you always have to ask. Always ask for something.
Yeah.
One of the things that I kind of want to hit on really quick, because I know we're kind of getting towards that mark. Um, Handling when you don't know an answer, because as a
Thomas
medical,
he always knows the answers.
it's so hard to not know the answer, because as soon as they ask me something, I'm like, oh crap, I don't know. My default's always like, hey, I don't want to give you the wrong information. I'm going to, gather that all up. I'm going to send you an email later. But I'll get it to you, by the end of the week. Or I always give them a deadline. But what strategies would you say are probably the best in that aspect?
Yeah, is just be honest and upfront, right? People don't want the wrong information. They don't want to be lied to, right? So if you don't know something, just say, "Oh yeah, I'm actually not sure, but let me look up or let me look into that for you. Let me go ask someone who might know that answer, and I'll get back to you." I have always found 99% of the time people really, really appreciate that answer. That is a really good answer because that means that you're going to go do some extra work for them, which people always appreciate, and that you're not going to, BS them and just give them something that sounds good at that moment where you're like, okay, cool, I checked the box and hope they don't ever bring that up again. Right. So if you say, hey, you said something too, I want to hit on it. You said, I'll send this to you by the end of the week. If you give them that date, and when you get in your car, as soon as you're out of there, even right then and there, tell them I'm making a note of it, make a note of it and do that. Do what you say you're going to do. If you tell someone, I'm going to get you information by the end of the week, by the end of the day, by next week, whatever it may be, tell them that. And if you don't have that info yet, just let them know, like, hey, still looking into it for you. Because people want to know that you didn't forget. That's not good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fascinating that you said, I thought you were for sure going to say just lie to them. Which
that does not
so many
work.
people do that though. Like it's the ego and the uncomfortableness of saying, I don't know. But I think honestly, if I was a provider, which of course not, I think I would bait into some of those questions. I really think I would. I think I would try to test the genuine aspect of maybe the rep, and I would throw out a question that it's more than likely they don't know, and just see how they handle it, because I think you'll get a good taste of the type of human being that you're working with. I think everyone ultimately wants to work with someone that they can trust, that they can know shoots them straight. And so I think that's honestly, it's probably advantageous for you to say, I don't know, but I'll look into that for you and I'll get back to you by X date. I actually think it probably helps you more so than the perceived like, oh man, I look dumb. But that's not the case.
Just think about, what did you just do? You just went and did extra stuff. You just told them that you're going to be indispensable and provide value that other people probably wouldn't, or they maybe have been lied to in the past by other people. And it's funny you say that, Chris. Now that I've been here for a little bit longer and I'm kind of a little more seasoned than that, I can tell. I like to think I can tell when someone's kind of feeling me out a little bit. There have been people who have asked me questions that I think are kind of, softball questions or kind of low hanging fruit answers that I can kind of tell, like, this is definitely something they already know, but they want to see what my opinion is. So yeah. Yeah.
New rep comes in, I'm always like, my go-to is like, tell me about CoQ10. Like, is there really a difference between ubiquinol and ubiquinone? Like, tell me about that. Or like, does crystallized matter or non-crystallized matter? And then I just wait for them to answer. Because if they try to BS me or they don't know, like I don't buy any of the products. I just move on to the next.
Yeah, people do that. It's okay. If they're trying to do that, just say, just don't lie. That's kind of the main. I know I said this like 6 times, but don't lie. Just say, I'll look into it and I'll get you that information. Yeah, that's okay. That's totally okay. You don't have to know everything all the time.
Yeah, which hopefully everyone listening to this podcast already had that as their default answer. But if you didn't, take lying off your cheat sheet in terms of your next sales appointment. You know what I mean? Cross that one off. Cool. Well, I think we could go on for a really long time, and I do think down the road we'd love to have you back on, because I know this could go super, super long. But I again just want to thank you for hopping on the podcast and shedding light on this. You were very polished, had a lot of good stuff for, I think, the average listener, but also for me, a lot of great takeaways. So I was super impressed, and I think you put a great foot forward for yourself and your company. I mean, it was.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you guys got a good thing going on, and I took away a lot of nuggets. So for those listening again, I would re-listen to this episode a couple different times. Maybe the first time you're just kind of taking it in. The second time, I think you could listen with probably a pen and paper. I think the big takeaways for me would be, the amount of activity that it takes. And I think the big thing that I take away as well is like, man, I wish I would have known Thomas, 5 years ago when you were starting out, because it'd be so easy to do this comparison. But man, you're really polished now. And I think in some ways you probably feel like 5 years is a long time, but in others you're probably like, man, I'm just getting started. And so what's great about obviously the skill that you build, and I think the skill that these pharmacies and these businesses could build is like, this is something that you can lean on, whether you're continuing in pharmacy and you're doctor detailing for the next 30 years or you are not. And so I just think that sales and communication is such a valuable skill. And I think Thomas is a good example of that. And I'm sure you feel like if push came to shove and you ever had to maybe go into a different industry or pursue another career path, that these skills would serve you for, your further career, wherever you might be. Right. So, yeah.
I can't speak for everybody, but if you're listening to this and you have a really good relationship with a rep that you work with currently, I mean, I would be more than happy to share some of this information with, pharmacists or providers that I work with if it's going to help them do what we've been talking about. So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I could use some help, you have reps probably that are coming to your office every single day who you probably know at least one or two of them pretty well. It's a great opportunity to just kind of pick their brain and get a different perspective because, like I said, everyone's different.
Yeah. Now, if you're comfortable sharing, if you are a pharmacist or a medical practitioner and you want to get a hold of Thomas, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so a good way is just connect with me on LinkedIn. You can always just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. That's a great way to do it.
What's your Venmo? You should have charged for this information. No, you should have charged for this.
Yeah. No, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect you with either one of our reps in our company because we are in every single state. We actually sell internationally as well. So there's someone who I could connect you with if you're like, man, I'd love to know more about this or how to increase front-end supplement sales, which is what we specialize in, under the umbrella of all that. I'm happy to do that. But yeah, Thomas Pennell is my name. There's probably not too many of us with that name on LinkedIn. So if you just type that in there, you can probably find me and connect with me that way. Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh. Sweet. Well, you guys have listened to another episode of the Money Medicine Podcast. Again, appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have questions, you got comments, you got feedback for ourselves or Thomas, make sure to leave them in the comments, and we'll bring them back at some point down the road. Thanks again.